All right, I believe, yes, we are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. This is Bookstore Romance Day. This is the Love is Queer panel, and I am so excited that you were joining us today. I would like to start by saying that I prepared for this as if I were preparing for a date. So I did I shaved, I showered, I drank a whole bunch of coffee. I have not had anything to drink other than coffee, so I'm like wired and ready to celebrate some queer romance. So first up, in no particular order, we have Adriana Herrera, who was born and raised in the Caribbean, but for the last 15 years has let her job and her spouse take her all over the world. She loves writing stories about people who look and sound like her people, getting unapologetic happy endings. Olivia Waite. My ring light is doing weird things with it. Olivia Waite writes historical romance, fantasy, and science fiction. She is currently the romance fiction columnist for the New York Times Book Review. To learn more and sign up for her newsletter, please visit www.oliviawaite.com. Cat Sebastian. Kat lives in a swampy part of the South with her husband, 3 kids, and 2 dogs. Before her kids were born, she practiced law and taught high school and college writing. When she isn't reading or writing, she's doing crossword puzzles, bird watching, and wondering where she put her coffee cup. And Roan Parrish. Roan Parrish lives in Philadelphia, where she's gradually attempting to write love stories in every genre. When not writing, she can be found cutting her friend's hair, meandering through the city while listening to torch songs and melodic death metal, or cooking overly elaborate meals. She loves bonfires, winter beaches, minor chord harmonies, and self-tattooing. One time, she may or may not have baked a 6-layer chocolate cake and then thrown it out the window in a fit of pique. And for the audience watching, I am certain that you can see the Ask a Question button down there. That is how you can ask questions so that we can pose those to the fantastic panel. There is also a Buy Now button. That Buy Now from Left Bank Books will take you to the Left Bank Books page. I am the events coordinator for Left Bank Books, happy and proud to be a queer-owned bookstore in St. Louis, Missouri. We do have all of these books available for sale at Left Bank Books. You can order to have them shipped anywhere in the country, almost anywhere in the world. So we would love to have your support. And now, I am going to ask the first question. I took notes. Not elaborate notes, though. It's just so, just a warning. I'm going to start with the through line for your series. So this will be a good way to introduce your series to readers that may not have read your books yet. So your books are in different places in the course of the series. So some of you, it is the first book in a series, some second, third. So I want to kind of find out how your series has that connective thread and what brings all of the books together. Let's start with Roan.
Sure. Well, I love writing series because every single time I write a secondary character, I get really excited about figuring out what's their story, what's their backstory. I love writing secondary characters where even if they have a really small part, it's like they say one thing that's weird enough or specific enough that in my head, I'm like, I could base a whole book around them. And so I leave myself like these trails of breadcrumbs where I'm like, oh, who was that? Also, I never remember anyone's name. So I'm like, who was that character that I wrote in chapter 3 that said that line? Yeah, they probably should have another book. So I'm the third book in my current series is the next one to come out. And the fourth one is written. So it is a complete series, which is Better Than People and Best Laid Plans that you just held up. And I think actually, yeah, every single book, the characters appear in multiple different books in the series, and they're all set in this small town of Garnet Run, Wyoming, which is an imaginary town. And yeah, so you meet people and then you meet them again in other books and they have bigger or smaller roles. And I just have a lot of fun intertwining everything and making it all, like tying it up at the end with a tidy little bow.
Kat, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my current series is about, like, it's basically a Robin Hood retelling, but it's set in the mid 1700s. And really, it was an excuse for me to write about men wearing boots and like cloaks, and also like defeating the aristocracy. And like I felt like that was enough to get me through writing 2 books, you know, like those with the aesthetics and also like the overall theme of crime paying, like was enough to sustain my interest. And so that's what and that's really like with any series, like that's, I think, what I'm trying to do is find a hook that keeps me interested. Because if it keeps me interested in writing the books, it is probably going to keep readers interested in going from one book to the next, you know? So I think that answers your question.
Next up, Olivia. I should just hold up your books when I want you to talk. Like,
well, my latest, Hellions Waltz, is the 3rd and concluding volume of the Feminine Pursuits series. It's 3 novels and a prequel short story. And the theme of the series is women and work in a historical setting. And it started as like, you know, I wanted to write embroidery and astronomy, and I decided to do it together. And then the through line is basically just, it's a very oddly structured series because I think of it as a carousel where you can hop on at any point and read each one as a standalone, but it's more fun if you take the whole trip all the way around. So you do see recurring characters, like heroines from previous and future books tend to pop up in really fun scenes, like, and usually say something significant and important and interesting, because like Roan, I always fall in love with the secondary characters every time, even when they're my own or other people's. And for me, the joy of this series was really getting to dive into stuff that historical romance doesn't really foreground a lot, like Kat's taking down the aristocracy in a very direct way. And I'm kind of doing it by ignoring the aristocracy. So there's actually a progression in the series where the first one we have a countess and an astronomer. And in the second one, all of the aristocrats are jerks. And in the third one, the only aristocrats are fake aristocrats. So it's definitely like, I'm kind of shying in more into this working class and middle class and like occupational kind of historical space, because there's so much fun stuff in it, like the beekeeping and the looms and just everything, all the tech and all of the history behind this is just, it's fascinating to me, and it's beautiful and it's so fun to play with, and the words are so specific. So
Adriana?
Yes. Well, that's the second book in my Dreamer series. That series is actually done. It was my debut series, but they're getting re-released with like really nice new covers, which is exciting. So, I wanted to write a book centering Afro-Caribbean queer people, which is not really something that you see a lot in romance. There is quite a lot of queer romance, but it's now that we're really starting to see more queer, especially like I think like romance with 2 men, right? There's quite a lot comparing to like the larger queer spectrum, but I wanted to do a friends groups. I like writing about friends groups just in my adult life and in my whole life. I've had a lot of different types of friend groups, and I wanted to write one about like people who grew up together. And so this group friend, it's four guys, and they're all from the Caribbean, and they all grew up together in the Bronx. And so I wanted to write about New York City, but I didn't want to write about like Midtown Manhattan or the Village or Brooklyn, which is where all the New York City stories are set. I wanted to write set in a place where like Black and brown people live. So I wanted to write about like those parts of New York where like my family immigrated to in the 60s. So that was kind of like the idea behind it. I was basically like, I want to write 4 books. I want all the guys to be from the Caribbean, and I want the first one to be a chef. And that was where I got started from.
Yeah, the food in your books are amazing. Like, Red Rooster is, I want to go there and I haven't been. Like,
it's so good.
So the kind of theme of this year's Bookstore Romance Day is kind of cross genre or blending genre. So I wanted to talk about what queer romance means. Is that its own individual genre? Do we have, because from your books, we have a wide kind of swath of representation from the queer romance genres. We have historical romance, we have contemporary romance. There's a lot going on. So I'm wondering if you think the queer romance genre stands on its own as its own, or if you think that it is part of like subgenres.
I actually think there's more than one. I think there's a bunch of queer romance subgenres. Because if you look at like lesfic and lesbian romance that have been coming out from places for decades and decades, ever since like the lesbian pulps in the 50s, those have very different structures and very different conversations that are happening than something like, you know, my Feminine Pursuit series, which is intensely bisexual, but which comes mostly from like historical MF romance traditions and a little bit like fanfic and the influence there. And then trans romance we could talk about for like forever, but trans romance is its own whole thing. Like there's entire like family trees of like trans sci-fi and fantasy with romantic elements. I get so excited about this kind of thing. So I think like it's really tempting to want to like say, oh, what is the state of queer romance as a genre? But I think part of the problem is that's one reason why we need the word like queer, is because there's so much happening in so many different directions at once. And I think that's partly why it's so exciting, is you can really do just about anything.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think that the idea of, I don't think that queer itself is a genre, but I think that in the world of publishing, there's a lineage where there are books that are like male romances that follow the tradition of MF romances, where it is a certain kind of or style of contemporary romance only with two men as opposed to a man and a woman. But I think that there are different segments of queer romance that there's a different temporality when you think about queerness, which is that so much of dominant culture suggests that there's a heterosexual time, right? Where it's like, you do this at this age, it's dependent on a certain kind of like get married, have a kid temporality that celebrates, that uses heterosexual benchmarks as its time. And there are queer romance subgenres that are really using a different kind of temporality, where there are different benchmarks. There is a different interpersonal relationship with family, with friends. They value different things. So unlike some classic romances that always had to end in a marriage proposal, obviously in certain moments, a lot of queer romances couldn't end that way. Because it wasn't legal, or it could be folks who have nothing invested in marriage because they're in a completely different lineage. So I mean, I think there are like a million things like that we could talk about. But I do think that one of the things that we lose when we talk about queer romance as just a subgenre of regular MF romance, sorry, not regular, or as being kind of parallel, is we lose all of these amazing diversities that have to do with time and place and what is valued and what a happily ever after looks like for folks who are really growing up and growing into love in a really different world. Yeah.
I think one thing that to me is like what happens in queer romance that I think hetero cis straight romance actually has learned from is that there is just a breadth of what desire means, about what sexuality means, that desire and sexuality are not the same thing, that gender sexuality, what you find exciting, what you find sexy, what you find erotic is very, very nuanced. And so I think when we try to kind of like operate from a binary, even in queer romance, thinking about like a man, a cis gay man is attracted to these things, and like like these things, like I think that's where we kind of like are like walking away from what makes queer, like people who are writing queer romance about people who are queer and their experiences could really lose, because I think queer romance has taught a lot of lessons to people who are writing about like cis people in straight relationships. Like there is such like, it's like the gray areas where like people really learn to explore like their sexual. I think, I mean, even for me as a person who, I mean, I knew that I was bisexual like pretty like early in my life, like my late teens, my early 20s. And even for me reading queer romance, I've learned a lot about like my own desire and the things that I find exciting. And I've grown in, like I have a deeper understanding about the things that, how my sexuality works. And it's like I've safely explored that in queer romance. And so I think that's where I feel like we can't operate in a binary when we're talking about this, like writing about these experiences and these love stories, because it's not the same landscape as cis straight romance. It just isn't.
Yeah.
To build on what everybody's been saying, I think that like as a queer reader, I feel like there's definitely straight romance. You know what I mean? Like where you have where I'm reading a book and then I'm really taken out of it. Like as a queer person, when it's like when it's really steeped in heteronormativity and like that like temporal, like we're doing things in this order, like that Roan was saying, and also like the primacy of blood family over found family and all of this, like that is straight culture. Okay. Like, and I don't really feel that I need to engage with it. And so that's straight romance. And that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the pairings of the people involved in this romance. It doesn't have anything to do with the sexuality of the person writing it, you know? It's just, I think, a worldview, you know? Like there's some same-sex romances that feel like really, really straight to me, you know? And there's some romance that is like where both people are straight and it feels like compatible with queerness in a way that maybe I can't totally articulate, but I've just started like as a reader to be like my default, I guess, is like queer stories. And then everything else is just like straight heteronormative stuff that I don't need to think about it. And so I don't.
Anytime a book comes along that says, oh, every woman was attracted to this particular hero. And I'm like, really? All of us? Do we have to? And I'm like, no, I get a little contrary. And I'm like, I'm going to read something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To follow up on your comment, Olivia, Madeline's requesting in the chat some recommendations for trans romance books. And there have been several that other people have commented about recommending, but do you have any specifically or any of the other?
Oh my God, yes. Everything E.E. Ottoman writes is gorgeous. Their latest, The Companion, is a trans poly triad, and it's historical, and it's so beautiful and sexy and like kind in a way. All of E.E. Ottoman stuff is just expansively, delicately kind in a way that really makes the reader feel at ease and welcomed. And I mean, it's been an anxious couple of years for me, and I am drawn like moth to a flame to this kind of writing right now. And it was like, oh, and the food, oh, the recipes. It's like 1950s upstate New York home canning, and I can't even tell you how it's the shortest, prettiest book about some very hard things and some people just trying to find themselves and who they care about and work things out in a very thoughtful way, and just hot as heck. So
and it's like cottage core.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man, it's gorgeous. And then Penny Ames has one that's is that out? Like just out?
It's out end of the month for the love of April French.
Yeah. And that one was interesting. It's like a dual timeline where you get to see the same events from each character's perspective. And then of course Mae Peterson is also writing for Carina Press, and she does these poetic, beautiful fantasy romances. And the one that's just out does have a trans female lead. as well. And there's some, I believe there's transmasc characters in the first one. Or, yeah, sorry, I should make notes of these things. But definitely Mae Peterson. Excellent work.
You did not know you were going to be asked this question, so I feel like you had really fantastic answers.
Oh, and my memory for names this year is just whoosh. I'm like, it's that one with the pretty purple cover. Great.
Yeah. Anyone else have recommendations that they want?
J.R. Gray has multiple romances with trans characters. Jay Northcote.
Ooh,
has I think his most recent one had a transmasculine main character.
There's
Chris Ripper.
Isn't there May the Best Man Win?
I'm so bad with titles. I don't know.
I'm better with titles than names, but there's a bunch coming out. Lucy Sterling has one that's coming out later this year as well.
Also, Peter Darling is
Austin Chant. Yes,
it's a lovely trans retelling.
Yeah.
And it's also like YA compatible. Like if you happen to have any younger readers in your life, we listened to the audiobook when my kids were like younger than middle school, and they loved it too. They were like shocked to discover that Peter Pan, like in its original state, has no trans characters. You know?
Yeah, I kind of want to throw in. It's not romance, but Becky Chambers,
Yes.
A Song for the Wild Build. Oh,
Yes.
It's non-binary and just like one of the most, like, I wish that book existed when I was in high school. I would be reading a ton more sci-fi and fantasy now if it had.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to talk about, I think I want to go into the hobbies because I think that we have talked about some really incredible things. There are a lot of hobbies that you bring up in the books that I feel like maybe you might have some interest in personally. If not, how did you come up with these hobbies? And I feel they're so fun and unique and make the books like feel very real and like, yeah, I just love the characters because of their hobbies.
I'm trying to remember what mine's hobbies was.
Dancing.
Yes, Camilo
money.
did. So, yes, Camilo had. So this is based in real life. So there's a place in Manhattan called Broadway Bodies, and it's like a body positive, affirming space. And basically, you go and you learn like dancing routines as a group. And I was volunteering for a couple of years for this place called the Ali Fournet Center, which is a place. It's a homeless shelter for trans kids, and we would take the kids to do like dancing Saturdays in groups to do like voguing and stuff. And that's where I got the idea, because I loved going to those field trips with the kids. Like I was a mentor, so we had I had a house that I would go to with hang out with the kids. So that's where that hobby came from.
I think that my character's main hobbies are pet ownership and reading. Okay, because those are the only two hobbies that I'm interested in at all personally. Like that's it. And so they spend a lot of time thinking about their animals, and they spend a lot of time getting to know one another through books. And that may be because that's the only way I know how to get to know people, you know?
Would you consider the crime a career or a hobby? Like some of your characters, the crime is a hobby.
For my characters, it's a vocation. They don't dabble. But yeah, like I think this falls under the like write what you know category, you know, I relate to people who are animal lovers, and I relate to people who are readers, and I find it so much easier to get into the psyches of people who are like that, you know, even if the animal is just a spider that you're rescuing from a stairwell, you know, like I feel like that's my way. That's an easy way in for me. And I'm totally not going to learn any hobby, any kind of like anytime, and it's not going to happen. You know, research is hard enough.
See, and I have the opposite. I want to learn hobbies specifically so that I can put them in books. And like I get an idea for like an artist, and then I'm like, crap, I have to learn watercolor now. And you know, it's fun. Like I'm never bored. It was great during the pandemic. We bought a digital piano, which I'd missed for years. Like it's been great to get back to that. But I'm doing so much right now that it's starting to feel a little absurd, like even to me. Which is great, but I have like a knitting project, a beading project. I've taught myself quilting this week. I'm very bad at it. It's great. There's the aforementioned watercolors, there's chickens, there's and this isn't even the stuff for the Feminine Pursuits trilogy, which is embroidery and astronomy and engraving and beekeeping and weaving and piano tuning. Plus the dressmaking and the seamstress stuff and I like occupations. I like the creation of stuff, and it's all like very artistic and like making of things as opposed to like the industrial stuff. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna get into the industrial stuff at some point because it's so fascinating. Like, have you ever watched videos on how neon signs are made? It's incredible. It's gorgeous. It's like all of they don't make these by machine. Like these are all hand bent because you have to point the torch at the part of the tube and then bend it precisely to match the paper pattern underneath, which is getting scorched by the hot glass as you're building. So like, man, it's crazy that people do that. It's amazing. And that's going in a book sometime. So it's just a question of when. And
I'm definitely on that tip as well. I love hobbies and I'm very promiscuous with them. Like I have gained so many hobbies in the pandemic, but I also I feel like it's almost the inverse for me. It's like I'll give a character a hobby or a thing that I want to learn about so that I have an excuse to do it. So like speaking of beekeeping, I was saying to Olivia and Shane before this started that the book that I'm writing right now, it's so ridiculous how it happens. It's like I was watching TikTok videos of beekeepers and I was like, bees produce honey and beeswax, two of my favorite things. That means bees are great. I'll just watch some bee videos. And the next thing I knew, I had decided that I would make one of my side characters a beekeeper. And then I would need to like research beekeeping so that I could write this one scene, which actually became a chapter. And now I said to my girlfriend, like, wait, can we start keeping bees? And it just escalates really. And the same thing is true with like in Invitation to the Blues, my character rebuilds a piano. And I was like, well, I guess I have to learn how to rebuild a piano now. And I get so delighted by all these hobbies and I want to do everything.
A reminder to the audience, be sure to type your questions up in the Ask a Question section. So we want to make sure that your questions get answered as much as mine, because as much as I love chatting and asking all of my questions, I'm certain that you have questions too. So type those up. We have to talk about sex. I just can't avoid the topic. So there's a varying level of like a lot of sex, not a lot of sex in your books. And I'm curious as to like whether you knew going into the book, like how much sex was going to be in there, whether the writing of the book kind of made the sexuality increase, decrease, whatever the case may be.
I know that like, okay, just some characters are just hornier than others. Okay, like that's my answer. Like some characters are like in bed together at 25%, and I have to like do all that I can to like get like story in there before it's just, you know, banging. Other characters, it's like they're on more of a journey, you know, and for that, in that kind of book, there's going to be less sex just because there's more other stuff happening in the book. I will say that like people have asked me like, how can you like if book 2 in a series is like extremely like sex heavy, like how can you write a book 3 that's not? And I'm like, yeah, like who's gonna come? The cop's gonna come to my house? Like if readers don't like it, like that's kind of, they can go leave a review saying they don't like it. And then other people who have like preferences about how much sex is in their books can like act accordingly, you know, but I'm starting with characters first. And if they're the kind of people who are going to jump into bed, we're getting a sexy book. If they're characters who aren't, we're getting a less sexy book. And also if characters have issues with one another that are sex related, okay, that also is going to be a book that has more sex in it, rather than if you have 2 people who are like instantly compatible or whatever, there's less for me to do with a sex scene there, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, you have that marvelous scene in what is it, Gentlemen Never Keep Score?
Yeah.
Yeah, which it's really like 3 scenes. They kind of have to work up to it, and
that's the sexy book I was thinking of. Yeah, is like that's a book that has like the full on, there's a dildo, you know, like just, and it's just because they're like their relationship issues, and like one of their like, for both of them, like that's an area of growth. It's an area of like they can trust one another and relate to one another and like relate to who they are through sex in a different way by being together. Okay, book 3 in the series has like maybe like 2 pages of sex or something, you know, and that's just because it just, there was less for those 2 to do, you know. But yeah, that's my answer.
And I think sometimes sex is like, there are lots of tools that we have to show a relationship building. And for some characters, those are like dialogic builds or plot builds or internal builds. But I think for some relationships, like the best way to show a change or a growth in intimacy or to show a character like going for something that they haven't gone for before is to show that through sex. And I've definitely found that like some of my most sex heavy books are also my most talk heavy books, because I mean, and this is maybe like just me and also potentially TMI, but I feel like one of the things is like a person that you can really talk with about your desire is someone who like you just have sex with a lot, because if you're always talking about your desire, then, you know, things happen. And, you know, and maybe for some people it's the opposite, right? For some people it's like some characters use sex to speak physically when they can't speak using their voices. I guess it goes both ways. But for me, I've noticed that like the more my characters process, the more they also process, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a writer, I mean, I'm a romance reader first before I became a romance writer, and I prefer very high heat books. So I enjoy writing sex. I think I find it really delicious and exciting to look forward to a really hot sex scene to write. And so for me, I like my books tend to have really high heat. And I mean, depends, of course. So like if it's warranted, like just this morning, I was like, I'm gonna have to take this one out. This is just gratuitous. So, but like that's like depends on what the promise of the premise is. Like I'm I'm finishing up a novella for this anthology that I'm writing with some friends. Last year we did Duke, I'd Like to F. And this year we're doing Break, I'd Like to F. And I'm writing an MM, it's like John Singer Sargent fanfic, which is kind of but I'm really into John Singer Sargent.
Wait, so we need like pre-order links and details now.
Yeah, seriously, like drop that right in the chat, please.
It's available for pre-order. So, but this book is like, it's like the Meet Cutest at a sex club. So it's like 8 chapters and like 6 of them are sex. And so like, that's the story. But for like something where like I have historical where like many things have to happen that are plot driven, I really like the sex really has to be there because it needs to be there, as opposed me having like my weird John Singer Sargent fantasy. So that's like, I think also, but I think I enjoy it, right? So that's also too like why my books tend to have a lot of sex. I love reading really high heat books, and I enjoy the writing of it and figuring out how I like build the relationship.
Same. I cannot believe that you just casually said John Singer Sargent fan fiction, and you managed to be on a panel with the three authors maybe most likely to gasp and be like, what? We are so turned on right now because you said John Singer Sargent. My day's made, basically.
It's the pandemic. So it's this is like a sidebar, but I read a story last year that they were doing an exhibit in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts because they discovered that like John Singer Sargent's muse for the frescoes he did there was this like a Black man who was an elevator operator in Boston, and they figured out that they were possibly lovers. And I'm like, I'm writing this.
Like those photos are not like objective at all.
I mean, John Singer Sargent was and he was like the Marlon Brando of like the Gilded Age. The man like slept with everyone. So like, why would I not write a story about him?
Yeah, no, you're doing God's work.
Lately, I've actually been writing lower heat. I started out in erotic romance, and I started with a publisher who, no matter how many sex scenes I put in, would always just kind of automatically ask for one more, which really drove me up the wall. So nowadays, I'm really focused in on only writing sex scenes that feel like they do something to plot or character or like the mechanics of the relationship, which means that the heat level in the Feminine Pursuits books tend to vary like wildly. I wrote 3 entirely different types of like sex relationships. Mm-hmm. So the first one's this very cautious, sweet, feeling it out step by step kind of thing. The second one is the slowest burn in the world. Like, I don't think they kiss till 70%, which is ridiculous. But then because they're older, as soon as they realize they're both having those feelings, it's just like straight banging, like just no messing around, which was great because I'm like, oh my gosh, it's taken forever. And I'm like, and now they have to hold back. Nope, they don't. They've both been married for like 30 years. They know what they're doing. Like, we're just going to get straight to the point. And then the third one, because of the heist, it had this much more like kind of volatile relationship where, yes, we don't know if we trust each other, but we're absolutely making out in the tavern by chapter 3. Like, and then hating ourselves for it afterwards a little bit. And it's really fun to let the question of how many sex scenes be a problem the book solves rather than a problem I have to solve.
Agree. I'm writing my first rom-com right now. Like, I'm almost finished with it. And when I was asking my editor, like, can you just give me some guidelines for what's the deal with the heat level in rom-coms in your opinion? And she was like, I think you tend to write pretty high heat. I would say maybe like go a little lower heat than you usually do. And I was like, okay, cool. So I'm writing it. But the thing is, this book it's actually a double romance. It's a house swap romance. So there's two different relationships. And I wrote it so that I wrote like this one romance all the way through, and then this one romance all the way through. And I was like, oh, so I'll put 3 sex scenes. That's instead of like 6, that's fine. But then I forgot that because it's a double romance, I did that in both romances. So now I actually have a rom-com with like 9 sex scenes in it. And I have a feeling I'm going to send it to my editor and she's going to be like, can we just cut half?
Set the standard, Roan. Set the standard because we need more sex in these rom-coms.
If you have 2 couples, you get to double the number of sex scenes. Yeah. It's just reason,
Right. Double the couples, double the word count, double the fucking. I feel
it's just math. Okay, it's just math.
That's what I'm going to tell my editor. It's just math.
Yeah.
Send her my email.
Yeah, the panel voted. We are all fine with it.
I will. I'll be like, the Love is Queer panel has all decided.
If it works, it works. Yeah. Question from Heather in the chat. Can you reflect on male-male romance written by women and why you think it's so popular? what's your thinking of this genre beyond how some are queerer than others? And this has been kind of a very hot button topic recently. So
I have a lot to say about it, so I can start. I think, honestly, I actually don't have that much to say about it. I have a few things to say about it. And mainly, I think it's what I was talking about before. I think we really need to be a little bit less like binary about, sorry, my dog is jumping in the chair behind me. I think we need to be less binary about how we perceive like desire and what is exciting and how, like, what intimacy means for people. And I think that is, I think, part of the allure of MM. I also think particularly for me, I think as someone who is, a bisexual woman who is, I'm like a fat woman, and I think I am not a white woman, like cis straight romance could only offer me so much. And I could never fit the standard of what the perfect woman was in a lot of the romance that was out there. And with MM, I was able to experience the romance without having to compare myself to something I could never compare to. And so I think I was able to like dive into the love story without feeling like any feelings of inadequacy. Like I'm never going to be like a super skinny blonde white woman. And so I think that's part of I think for me personally, I think that is largely also why I think MM romance is that popular with women. And also I think it's the piece of like safely exploring things and also seeing men being vulnerable and emotional. That is, like soft, seeing men be soft is something that is, there's a comfort to that I think exists in gay romance that not necessarily exists in like cis straight romance where you have like the alpha males and all that, although you have a lot of alpha males in MM. But again, I think those three things, honestly, I think is part of what is what it is, because it is undeniably very popular for women.
And this is one of those questions like, is romance feminist, where the first follow-up question you have to have is, well, which romances are we talking about? And like, what do we mean by feminism? So, if you're talking about why do so many straight women write MM, well, actually, a lot of the women I know who are writing and reading MM, including myself, reading it, not writing it, tend to be queer women. And I've said this in the past, I believed it to be true that like straight women are mostly writing MM, and that's weird and fetishizing. And I think that there is a lot of that, but there is also parts of the genre where you're having that exploration. So I don't think it's necessarily any one thing. I think it really does matter what kind of text we're talking about. I do think it's a problem if all the MM you're reading is by women as opposed to people who identify as men. I feel like that's kind of like the nothing about us without us problem. Like, if all of your stories about, say, Black characters are written by white people, you're not going to be seeing the whole story. Like, even if it is like something about like trying to connect, I feel like, and this is Adriana, this is not a criticism of you specifically, but I do know that it can often be hard for queer men in queer romance spaces to be like taken as seriously. And it's really strange when you see things like Red, White, and Royal Blue, and it becomes such a runaway hit. Whereas One Last Stop isn't having like the same kind of giant weird thing. And there's all these kind of intertwined, like queer women writing stories about queer women never seem to hit as big as queer women writing stories about cis gay men. And there's a lot of messy layers about that. And I don't,
a lot of it in misogyny.
Misogyny, yes.
And a lot of it is misogyny.
Yes, and everything that comes packaged along with it. You've got your white supremacy, you've got your fat phobia, you've got your ableism by the bucket loads, like just all of that stuff. And so it's really hard to come up. We all want a singular answer to this, and it's not possible.
There's also a lot to do with like forcing authors out of the closet that aren't comfortable with it, aren't there yet. So
yeah, I agree with that. I agree with both what Olivia and Adriana have said. And I think that it's a really interesting question within to ask within romance, but I think we can't have that be the edges of where the answer goes to, because one of the things that, and I was just talking about this with I did a Zoom before this, and I was talking with a queer reader of queer romance about this, is like, we cannot get away from the fact that anyone socialized as a woman grows up in the patriarchy where there's only one singular figure of neutrality, and that is the cis white man. Every other grouping or person who fits in any other category is either standing in for a category, being an outlier of a category. The white supremacist patriarchy gives us the cis white male as the singular neutral figure that we all have to work with. You grow up reading books about them, watching movies about them, having your classes taught by them. And what that means is that is a character that we are told you have to do your work with the model that you're given. And so we grow up reading those books and watching those movies. And for those of us who were queer, or those of us who were women who were thinking about gender in a different way, we grew up creating our stories and have with that as our starting point. And then what you do is because it's an empty figure, you put all of your own stuff inside it. So it's a blank, empty canvas that you are allowed to throw all of your desire and identification and disidentification and shame and lust onto. And so then it is the one figure that's available to everyone, no matter what your race or your gender or your ethnicity or your sexual orientation. It's the one, I don't know, what do you call the most abundant mineral in the world? It's like our one thing that we all get to play, like Play-Doh that we all get to play with. And so I think that that is a deep material consequence of growing up in a white supremacist patriarchy, is that you're going to get every other kind of person saying, this is the one emptied out figure that I can throw all my stuff onto and let this character just be himself, as opposed to a stand-in, an outlier, this, that. And so what we get then in romance, I think, is a whole lot of different people writing romance, but a huge number of those are queer women or trans women or non-binary women who are saying, I need a neutral figure that I can use to work in my story. And that's a lot bigger than saying it's straight women fetishizing gay men. What it also is a consequence of the world that we all grew up on that is inescapable, right? Especially if you grew up socialized as a woman, with everything that comes along with your gender, your sexuality, your body, your desire, all being policed, pressured, etc. So I just think it's a question that is super important to talk about, but also has a much wider base than just that question about romance.
And
I just wanted to add, I just wanted to just say one thing, because I'm writing a historical romance right now, and the hero is he's a white man. And I told my editor, this is the last time I write a white man, because they make everything harder for me, because it's just not the world. It's not what I can, I can't write the worlds that I want to write anchored on this figure that really does it's I don't know, Star Wars, the thing that eats all the energy.
Yeah.
I have to do so much work to make this white man, be heroic to a black love interest, that it really does drain my ability to be creative.
It's a page.
So it is. It is, and I think it's because it's not my experience. It's probably I'm way far from that center of power, but also because it is true. It is such the standard for everything that it does kind of it unbalances when you're trying to write kind of larger worlds and marginalizations.
And there's there's a lot of extra complications that go along with that, where Adriana, you're writing the historical, and Kat, you write the historical. There's so much more information available about men, like just acres more information about men. It's ridiculous. And it's not necessary, but it's the bias of the archives. And so it really can be a struggle sometimes to try and represent marginalizations of all kinds, because there's just especially in an era where we can't go and just park ourselves in a library all day and surf through, institutional access becomes a problem, and all of these things replicate the same patterns of biases. And so every filter narrows us more toward the straight white male figure. And it's enough to bum you out on a very real level.
It's hard out here.
The only thing I would add to that is, for those of us who came from the fanfic tradition, which is almost entirely cis gay men, I feel like a factor is that the stories we are writing fanfic about tend to have cis men as the only interesting characters. Okay, and so you're going to write about story. So if you're writing fanfic, you're writing about the characters that you have in front of you, and if they're men, then they're men. Yeah. And I think that if that's where you get your start writing, then it's a natural transition for you to keep writing about that particular pairing.
And then,
for all the reasons that you guys were all saying.
And that brings up the other problem, which is the question of money. This is one thing that I think is really interesting, and I don't have any good answers here, but we talk about fanfic a lot, and we talk about something that I think all writers do, which is work out questions on the page. If I have a question about identity, a question about relationships, a question about how the world works, I work it out through the characters on the page, just to explore that space in a way that isn't didactic, that isn't trying to prove that I have an answer, but more experience the problem. It can be really therapeutic, to use a very boring word, but I do think that you have some responsibility when you take something that can be therapeutic. If you're a teen writing fanfic and working stuff out, you can be as messy as you want. I feel as soon as you start asking for money for that, you have to ask yourself questions about how could I make sure I'm not harming anybody with this narrative? How can I make sure this is responsible representation? How can I make sure I'm not making another situation worse just because it's not my experience? And I think publishing isn't really good at talking about money, and specifically in talking about who gets money in publishing and who deserves money. And so I guess, yeah. No answers.
We'll be taking over the next panel to discuss that topic further in detail. We do. One of my questions that is asked, actually a question from the Q&A from Kelly at Boobies and Newbies, which I love. What are your favorite and least favorite tropes to write? Is there one you haven't gotten to write but really want to?
Secret baby. I hate it. I have a really good idea for one, and I'm going to do it someday. And spoiler, it involves cloning. because of that. Because suddenly there's a reason the baby is secret, and you're like, ooh. And yeah.
That's a hook.
Yeah. No, yeah. I've had the idea forever. I just need the people waiting to come along and scoop it up.
I love marriage of convenience so much. It's not my favorite trope, but it's one of them, and I can't figure out. I mean, I write historical queer romance. I can't do, you know what I mean? It's to do a same-sex pairing with a marriage of convenience is not going to happen, I could do it with bisexual characters, and I'm thinking about it, but that is one of my favorites. Because it has your forced proximity. It has if you have two reasonable characters, they're really going to try to work it out. I like that a lot. My least favorite trope. See, this is the kind of thing where I'm going to say my least favorite trope, and then I'm going to immediately think of 20 counterexamples. I don't like Secret Baby either, but Beverly Jenkins' Secret Baby book is a masterpiece. No, okay, yeah. I don't like Fated Mates, but I'll read 10 billion words of fanfic with soulmates,
with soul marks, yeah.
fate. Like that's my favorite trope with fanfic. Okay. I just don't like it I don't like it when it's like fated mate and it's like really like hetero bonding stuff and claiming mates and stuff, you know. Really, I'll read anything as long as I'll read anything. No standards.
I'm in the like Cressley Cole recovery support group, so fated mates is like my favorite trope. Also the Black Dagger Brotherhood recovery program. But I hate Secret Baby, but mostly if it's like, but then again, like I read a Naima Simone Secret Baby book just this year and it was great. So it's like it's my lead, like it's the one that I won't like go to. Like it's Secret Baby's one that I'll only read if it's an author that I know I love or someone that I like know is good, like has similar taste and I recommends it. So it's not one that I go for. So and then my favorite probably is like Rivals to Lovers, Enemies to Lovers. I always feel like we say enemies to lovers, but are they enemies?
No, like enemies.
Rivals to Lovers, like I like a good like workplace romance or something like that where like there's a lot of tension around, you know, what they're after. So that probably is the one because it's like dynamic and usually has good banter.
I'm sitting here and I literally cannot think of any tropes. Something is my brain's broken. I don't think I think of books that way because I can't think of any I've never read a Secret Baby book, but I feel sure I wouldn't like it because I don't like children. But I can't think of any tropes that I like definitively wouldn't read or would. I mean, I won't. I guess mine are more maybe they're not tropes. Maybe they're like bits. I hate billionaires. And and then of course the second someone asked me this once and I said that and then I was like, maybe I'll write a billionaire romance where it's like the billionaire just divests of all the money. But then I'm like, but I would still have to write a book where for a little while someone was a billionaire. I don't like military or cops.
Ooh, yeah.
I like
cop romances.
Yeah, I mean there are exceptions. Like obviously there are people who join the military because they like it's their only way out of their town or they need money or they you know, but like people who are like like
the Navy SEAL trope.
Yeah, like war mongering hero types, which is all like military cops stuff I hate and generally wouldn't write. I don't know.
All right.
I'm such a sucker for like I love a grumpy sunshine. I love a like they meet and they like each other a lot and then continue liking each other. Is that a trope?
Yes.
I think we have like a minute left, but I want to remind everyone to hit the buy now button that is at the bottom of the screen. All of these authors' phenomenal books are available for sale at Left Bank Books. We can ship anywhere in the country. Support your own local. If you have a favorite local, do that. Last question. Quick question for all of you. If you had to live in a romance, what genre of romance would you want to live in? Mine is queer, cozy mystery, Jessica Fletcher style.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, okay, I want that too.
Yeah, me too. That's what I want.
I'll be your neighbor.
That's what I want.
Bodies together.
Yeah, I want to move into Cat Sebastian's historical mysteries. The 50s spy queer.
Oh, yeah.
I want to live in that village, specifically that village. Yeah.
I want to live in that village, but I want to run a bakery.
See, yeah.
Have it be a bakery mystery.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you so much. It has been such a pleasure getting to meet you, getting to hear all of your phenomenal answers. So many incredible answers. And I want to hold up all of the books again. Buy these books. They are phenomenal. Buy all of their books. Really, just you all are amazing authors, and I will be continuing to read you for as long as you are putting out books. So please do continue to put out books, and we are all looking forward to what is next for you.
Hey, thank you so much, Shane.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shane.
Great.
Thanks for coming out, y'all.
Yes, thank you.